Hey Summer Uppers, Tennant here with a quick note. This episode, where Let Me Sum Up lays out the big climate policy decisions facing Australia's returned federal government, was recorded as bonus content for the generous subscribers who help keep this pod going. But we're putting it in the main feed for two reasons. One, there was a technical issue with Apple Podcasts which threatened to prevent Super Summer Uppers who back us there, rather than on Patreon, from getting their sweet, sweet bonus content. And we can't let that happen. Two, regular listeners might like to see the glittering rewards that await you if you subscribe. You can get a bonus like this one every fortnight for just $10 a month. That's the cheapest way to get a warm glow since they banned radium paint. If that was us with our hair up, just how opinionated are we going to have to get with our hair down?
You went to town on the nuclear, but I love it.
Like repression can only go on for so long.
There Is Too Much, your regular extra serving of us banging on about the 2025 election result. And we did a lot of political commentary. I think we turned into a political podcast for a week this week, which I was totally here for and have been advocating for days. And luckily the election result actually justified it and you guys came on board. But there's a bunch of more detailed, what is this all going to mean for this or that sort of policy process, this or that decision that we know is coming up in the next 2 or 3 years. I reckon we should all pick a few favourites and jump in and share a view. Tennant, dare I ask, what is top of mind for you in terms of potential big policy reforms that the government could take on with this thumping new majority and nary a risk that it could be demagogued by a non-existent opposition party?
Well, I could surprise you, but I won't. Look, a piece of unfinished business from the first term that is very much still awaiting an outcome is our old friend, the Carbon Leakage Review. I think technically final recommendations of that review officially not yet received. I assume they're in the inbox now or shortly will be.
Oh, that's right. The paper was kind of like an issues paper and there was going to be more recommendations and they were supposed to be by the end of the year, theoretically, weren't they?
They were.
Yeah.
And so recommendations were pretty clearly going to include, among the things that the Australian government should do to avert the risk of carbon leakage, loss of industries we should have a bright future in due to unevenness of international and Australian climate policies, adoption of a carefully designed, tightly focused border carbon adjustment. That's a decision that the government will not take lightly, will need some thinking about. It's a complex international environment. It's also an environment where this is probably not in the top 10 of greatest affronts to the international trade regime. In fact, it's the most truly respectful to the WTO and the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade reform that I could imagine. But anyway, it would take a lot of deciding and then consulting on the detail of design of and then doing. And so if they are going to go in that direction, and they should, because you do need a fit-for-purpose long-term answer to carbon leakage fears, they had better get their skates on, because a 3-year term is actually not a very long time to do that work and start to get something into place.
So one interaction is obviously the political cycle and wanting to kind of have that bedded down. Another is the interaction with the 2026-27 safeguard mechanism review. Yeah. Tennant, do you think that these two questions, and in terms of the safeguard review and whether we adopt some form of CBAM, like you need to have those conversations together, or is the decision around a CBAM something that one could take and then that would influence the review because you've got this overarching policy framework that is doing a lot of the lifting for you?
So I think myself that you would just get on with the border adjustment decision and design process and implementation and let the broader review of the future of the safeguard mechanism treat the outcome of that, or at least the initial outcome of that, because I think if a border adjustment is adopted, it will start very narrowly just with cement and related products and then add a few extra products over time as and when it proves practical and necessary. Let the 2026-27 safeguard review take that as a fact on the ground to be considered in terms of its implications. I do think that once you start down the path of a border adjustment, forever will it dominate your destiny, that it will actually open up new possibilities in safeguard design rather than closing them off. So I think that would be a good sequencing rather than, succumbing to one big review-itis, which can lead to a bit of decision paralysis.
I mean, it makes sense to me that you would have some in-principle decision on doing the BOCA and getting on with it to inform the safeguard review and design, which could be made more ambitious, knowing that there would be a BOCA in place.
Yep. I want to go through these pretty rapid fire because there's a lot to cover. I'm going to jump in on the nationally determined contribution, and there's various verbaling going on about when this thing was supposed to be in by, but it's certainly the case that because we are advocating for a Guernsey hosting COP31, it strikes me as implausible we would not have an NDC going into Bonn. Like, that seems like table stakes, and it would be passing strange to turn up and say we want to host COP31 and yet we haven't determined what our NDC for 2035 is. Give it to us anyway. I think there's going to be some pressure on the government, but that creates some pretty crunchy timelines because, as we've noted, the CCA advice is stuck in the outbox, and Brad needs to reboot his computer, and
tech support may already be on the case.
But that needs to be considered, and then some deliberation needs to be made, and that will be a decision which is not taken lightly because it has obviously huge implications for the government and its policy agenda moving forward. So between forming a ministry, working through those internal consideration processes, and the Bonn intercessional, which is in the second half of June, the timeline's against them. So it'll be fascinating to see how that plays out. There's also these little things called sectoral decarbonisation plans. We haven't been flying under the radar recently, announced with some fanfare back in 2023 at the Clean Energy Council conference. Obviously, huge amount of work from a variety of departments and countless stakeholders to lean in on those and make them as robust as they could possibly be. Noting that this is the first version, it's necessarily going to be the worst version. They will need to be iterated over time. But I for one think broadly that having these dedicated plans is probably a good thing, engaging the departments, engaging stakeholders around the particular opportunities and challenges in each of their sectors. But it's gone a bit quiet, Frankie.
Yep. I mean, those of us in stakeholder land have been, maybe we've been promised a little look at the sector plan or two. There's 6 in the works, and I think, we all kind of knew at the end of last year that they wouldn't see the light of day until post-election. But a little bit like I think the NDC is more material in that sort of COP31 context. But I think it's useful to think about the purpose for which these things are meant to serve, and that's to give us the playbook across the economy of all the things that we need to do and over what time frames. And that starts to become even more important when you consider, and you were talking about this earlier, Luke, around the things that will need to happen between 2030 and 2035 are very different than the things that are going to get us the emissions reductions we're going to get out to 2030. And we know that there's, regardless of where the target lands, it's going to be a bigger lift in a shorter period of time than we've done since 2005 for the current NDC that we've got. Like, we are going to have to ramp up ambition and action. And, you know, when you start to look under the hood across those different economic sectors, there aren't necessarily big meaty levers like a safeguard mechanism in every sector, you know, that you can pull. So there's a lot of detailed policy work and programs that need to be spooled up. Again, sort of thinking about with enough time to prove themselves out and demonstrate that we can get these things done at scale. Things like getting households and commercial buildings off of fossil gas, for example, would be one of those, and you'd hope would feature in, you know, a building sector plan. So it's kind of like we needed them last year, but we'll take them, I guess, anytime that we can get them. The question I have, or the thing I'm thinking about, is whether... Like, I don't think that there were any formal commitments made about whether they would be integrated into any kind of formal policy architecture in terms of like that overarching governance. Like, we've got a Climate Change Act. It sets out various things, but it doesn't really provide for the legislating, you know, of sector plans that need to be updated every so often and things like that. So there could be a piece in the next little while on updating that kind of overarching governance that we've got. And I bring that up because obviously we need to see ambitious sector plans across those 6 sectors. But the other thing that we still haven't seen, despite it having been consulted on early last year, was a national adaptation plan.
Yes.
And it's so important, and it's very, it's tricky, complex, material kind of policy and implications when you start looking at adaptation. And my worry is if there's not some stronger kind of guardrails around that policy, and I remember we did an episode, I think, on the issues plan, and I remember feeling deeply underwhelmed by it. Yeah, we're going to have to ramp up our work there, and there's going to be a lot of tension around what can be funded and how much focus can be put on various elements of this. So there's a lot of decisions to be made around where and when effort is applied across all these things.
I think looking back over the last 3 years, you'd have to give the Albanese government, you know, good marks on the mitigation side of the ledger. You know, some very significant and complex reforms have been prosecuted. You've got the overarching framework of the Climate Change Act. You've got, you know, safeguard reform. You've got the vehicle efficiency standards, even the capacity investment scheme. All these things really kind of strategic interventions that really support decarbonisation in key parts of the economy. Adaptation's kind of a fail, acknowledging that they were coming off a very low base. But 3 years in, we still don't have a plan, and there's no architecture or resourcing, and that just exposes households and businesses right around the country to a huge amount of risk, right? Because weather events are going to keep getting more extreme and more frequent, and we literally don't have a national plan for how to deal with that. It's all ad hoc, reactive responses, and that's got to be pretty high up the list of to-dos from a climate perspective in this next term.
And there are genuinely very difficult challenges that we're going to face when we, you know, eventually do kind of face up to and start to deal with that in any detail and complexity. Like, I can't remember how much we've ever talked about this in the context of the pod, but I mean, the fact that insurance is unaffordable in vast swathes of the country means that the insurance industry starts to become a quasi-regulator in a way by dictating kind of how insurable houses are, and that kind of thing over the long run is going to spook investment. Like, it's not ideal for a range of reasons. And so needing to have, like I think, if you were, I don't know, if you were investing in construction or something in this country and you couldn't see a plan for which I'm going to overlay onto planning regimes, maybe the fact that we shouldn't be building lots of houses in floodplains anymore or something like that. Like absent all of that, you'd have to think those investments start to look very risky. So there are like very big challenges being faced up to. And like this is in the context of Australia as a country with a growing population and the need for more housing. So, that's a particular bent in it. But the risks are very real. They're growing like every other year or even every year we're seeing big natural disasters strike, and like there's no evidence that is slowing down. So I think we need to move past the idea that we need to focus on mitigation at the expense of adaptation, like it's got to be both of these things at once. Like we just need to be moving on these things in parallel.
All right, rapid fire. Tennant, what do you want to go to next?
Well, I reckon, even though we've properly been saying the sector plan's super important, in part because they broaden the focus to getting serious about policy and activity beyond the electricity sector, we do need, and the government will need to devote a lot of attention to the electricity sector as well, because there's a vast amount of stuff to get built. And the government has put in place the capacity investment scheme, rewiring the nation, a lot of effort on speeding up delivery. But there's going to need to be even more attention and navigating social license, defeating a push in the federal election for turning down the dial of ambition on delivery of transmission is not the same thing as winning the argument with communities and people in communities who don't like these projects. And so one way or another, negotiate through or crash through or spray money around, whatever, a lot of work there. And ideally not just on actually spraying money around, but getting much better at actually delivering projects. That's something that industry has a role in. There's been tremendous improvement in the level of automation involved in deploying large-scale solar, for instance. But the government piece of that, I think, is going to be really, really important. And within this space, there's also the navigating through whatever the recommended successor mechanisms, policies, otherwise, to the capacity investment scheme from the review of the national electricity market. Those reforms almost certainly are not something that the federal government will be able to do alone. They will need to be agreed with the states. And I think the prospects of getting that agreement are they're absolutely there, but it won't be something that you can take your attention off because we will need a lot of investment beyond the capacity investment scheme.
Yep. I mean, that is such a huge issue, exactly how one structures the incentives around new capacity beyond the end of the CIS. I also think that there's a lot of the issues that we're seeing sort of bubble up to the surface through the NEM review. They go to market rules, they go to incentives. They also go to fundamental structures of governance and market design, which is tough for Tim Nelson to deal with within the terms of reference that he's got, really focused on, immediately actionable reforms. But I wouldn't be shocked if there was a more root and branch review of governance around the national electricity market and how decisions are made, the types of decisions are made, the things that are considered in the context of those decisions. Because I think there's going to be areas where there's clearly work to do, but is impossible to get one's arms around without taking a proper step back and thinking about how all those things are functioning and whether they're set up to support the kind of market that we're going to be seeing in the 2030s and beyond.
Did we talk about EPBC?
We did not.
No. That's a quick one.
Nobody's got answers. I just have lots of questions because, it's a very confused picture, right? Like, this was one that absolutely was completely absent from campaigns of, both sides. It didn't feature at all.
There was a promise to do the EPA.
There
but
was.
Maybe not the same EPA.
No, and that didn't land, and the personnel question is really relevant here too, right?
I'd be shocked if Tanya Plibersek was the Environment Minister in the next government.
She had a wonderful time. Surely she'd want more of that.
I think she definitely would be wanting a role change. I have to say I haven't thought deeply about this. I'm not sure who the obvious replacement in that portfolio potentially is, but in any case,
fresh meat for the grinder.
Yeah, well, yeah, a little bit, yeah, because it's complex. So if it's not Plibersek kind of picking up where she left off, and maybe there's some kind of, as unlikely as it might be, Albo saying, "I'll throw you a bone and we can do the deal with the Greens," or something that almost got there on something. Getting up early in a new term. If it's not that, then it's a new minister who's got to get across the brief, and you can't see anything happening quickly there. And that's going to tie into, I think, pretty quickly what the Greens want to extract, for the passage of other potentially unrelated legislation around new coal and gas approvals, and other things that were kind of thrown into the mix the first time around when reforms on or the bills around establishing an EPA were kind of floated. So that's a very interesting soup there, and I don't have really any sense of where that's going to go, but one would think something needs to happen this next term. And if it's a new minister, that sort of, to me, suggests that might be, in the second half of this term rather than the first half, just because of the complexity of what's at stake here and the need to get across a brief for a new person.
And given how complex and politically horrible what you just described sounds, why would they not just go, put it on the slow train? I think there's a couple of very good reasons not to do that. One of them being that environmental protection at the federal level is just not going very well. The state of the environment is not what we would all want it to be in many respects. The second reason is that even while it is not doing that good a job at protecting the environment, the system is very slow and complex and costly to engage with, and we can't afford to go slow on deploying a vast amount of clean economy related infrastructure and a lot of other things. So making it work better in every sense is just a really important priority. We're not going to get to among the barriers to Australia clean energy superpower is, could you build a terawatt of solar this century under the regulatory structures that we've got? And no, you couldn't.
Yeah,
so
the regime in Australia is internationally, it's highlighted as a detractor for investment here. So, there's definitely, it's an interesting perspective to take when, it's not clean energy projects that often feature in the discussion around EPBC reform. It's coal mines and, other things. But it's relevant. The same processes be going on, and same very lengthy timeframes for getting certainty about how those projects progress. I'm keen to extend the segue on the personnel chat, though. We all think Chris Bowen's going to stay Climate and Energy Minister.
So my take on that is because COP31 is such a live prospect and the very significant role that he's played in the last couple of COPs, I think it would be insane to move him on, and I don't think he'll have any desire to move on. I think he'll want to land that plane, and I think, another a more interesting question is, I suppose, what specific role he plays, right, Tennant?
Well, being Energy and Climate Minister in a government that has pretty big ambitions already in energy and climate and could have even bigger ones is a more than full-time job. And being president of a UN Conference of the Parties is also a more than full-time job. And is it actually to everybody's benefit to combine those two things? You could make an argument that no, it isn't, that there should be a choosing decide which one you're going to allocate your most currently COP experienced minister to. You could also make the case that, well, there is a lot of synergy between them, but that requires like some pretty empowered assistants or deputies on each front. And it's not an easy choice, but you just look at how much difference there is between the outcomes and the international impression made by a COP president who is 100% head in the game and putting everything they've got into it versus those who are not up to the job. And you just want to maximise your chances of success.
So would you expect, Tennant, that, we win the bid because we don't necessarily have a huge amount of time available to us? Would you think the government would want to appoint a COP president very quickly and have that individual in place?
I really think you would. Now, you could have some room for a bit of change. The UK changed COP presidents in the midst of the very long, unexpectedly long road to COP26. And the replacement, Alok Sharma, was really good. And that change did not ultimately detract from it at all. But we don't have a long run-up. And I think you want to make that decision very fast and be ready to stick with it. I just think the president is going to need a lot of help.
So do you think, would you establish like an extra assistant minister role for that? Or just...
Yeah, it's one way to do it.
Yeah.
You could look out... I'm not 100% sure of how... the Australian system, which is of government, our system of government is more important in this respect than the UN FCCC's procedures. How do you go around who you consider able to hold that role on behalf of Australia? In other polities, you could just appoint somebody, whether they're in the parliament or not. In ours, you might want to have it be a parliamentarian. But if not, that's an interesting thing too, because there's some pretty useful... I think you could have a highly empowered chief executive of the COP under the president, which is what Dubai's approach was, very successfully.
Yeah. And which, that's a fascinating discussion. I'm sure we'll have at length into the future and, well... Maybe not for too long.
Not that far in the future.
In any case, but the prospects for, how you cast that. Do you reach across the political aisle a little bit with a role like that, or there's some symbolism is important.
Whoever is doing it, how they play domestically and internationally are two considerations that will be reflected on carefully. I'm going to confine us to one more thing each. That we want to cover because it is getting quite late here in Auckland, and Frankie and I have not eaten dinner.
That's true. We were going to go for a walk too, which is looking increasingly unlikely. All right, I'll keep it snappy because it was still on personnel. Like, I've just looked at the count for Josh Wilson and it's down to the wire. The independent Kate Hewlett's ahead by 196 votes.
So this is Josh Wilson, current Assistant Minister for Energy and Climate Change.
Yeah, so I think it would be a really sad loss if he wasn't to regain his seat. I think he's certainly incredibly passionate about the issue. Like, he really kind of grabbed the opportunity of that assistant ministership with both hands, and he's been getting stuck in, and he's been really lovely to deal with. So that would be a huge loss if he doesn't get up, I reckon. And, it's relevant to this conversation, right? Because it's a big portfolio and you need really competent people to hit the ground running with everything that we've talked about. There's a lot to be getting on with.
All right, we'll watch that one with interest. What about you, Tennant? What's your final pitch?
Oh, so many. There's more stuff in the policy space. The green industry policies will take a lot of implementing. There's gas stuff. But just on how any of this might play out, anything that does need legislation, how it may play out in the Senate. Last term, the coalition were not really up for negotiating seriously on anything in the climate space. Their strategy was oppose the lot. And the Greens mostly did deals in the end. There was some grandstanding and more grandstanding on non-climate and energy issues. What's going to happen this time? Who knows what direction the coalition will go in, if any? Will they have imminent stuff before them in the Senate to decide on? I don't know. I would guess that the Greens will remain very much in the get to a deal in the end space on a lot of this. Yes, there are stark differences in their commitments and Labor's vibe on how to handle the future of fossil fuel projects, for example. There's a lot of stuff in the Greens platform that you could see being pushed for in a realistic way, maybe with fewer zeros attached to it, in a negotiation on other legislation. They've got the basis for a bunch of negotiations, I think. So I would expect that to be a fairly productive, if occasionally tense, collaboration.
All right. Well, I'll just note that one of the many things that this election result sort of beds down and that we now know we'll be seeing playing out over coming years is climate-related financial disclosure. We've had that first tranche of companies captured this year. There's going to be another 2 tranches. The coalition was going to the election saying effectively they were going to chuck it all out. Well, that's not going to happen. And so it's going to be up to the government to sort of monitor the rollout of that. I think we've had a bit to say in other podcasts, in other episodes about, the government needing to stay on the balls of the feet and seeing how this first tranche of companies is faring and making sure that as we bring in smaller companies that this is implementable, it's providing useful, actionable information, avoiding to the degree that's possible it being seen as a compliance exercise. What I would say is that the government has a role in also providing complementary policy that supports businesses to act on the information that is being surfaced through climate-related financial disclosure. It is, you could argue it is necessary but not sufficient in terms of engaging with the business community on their journey. And so that'll be an interesting one to watch as well. All right, summer-uppers. Literally everything you need to know about what will transpire in climate and energy policy in the coming, 15 years of Labor government.
There was so much more in the notes, far out. I'm glad it's late here because we would have just kept going.
Well, the good news is, Frankie, we record one of these bonus episodes literally every fortnight. So I actually feel calmed that there is still more things to talk about.
The carcass won't be picked clean in 2 weeks' time. There'll still be some morsels to savour.
Thanks for the support, gang. We will talk to you again soon.